Well, quick recap. After our very aggressive field testing on the way to UCC, we took the truck, took the CP4 apart, ground one of the rollers, turned it 90 degrees, reinstalled it, very aggressively damaged the pump. Went ahead and pulled our show trailer up to Indianapolis to Lucas Oil Raceway, and it made it most of the way with the trailer, but eventually the pump became low output enough that it laid down on us in about the worst place on the interstate. But swap trucks, able to fire it back up, and it kept going. So with light load, it's okay just because the fuel output on the pump's down. But we made it to the track and then drove it around a little bit there to see whether we thought we were gonna make it home. I decided to go ahead and give it a go and limped it back Sunday, and it made it, believe it or not. Just barely, but it made it. So the disaster prevention kit not only catches all the debris, but it actually allows you to limp the truck a lot further than you would have normally. So it's got about 180 miles or so on it in its current configuration, being very damaged. About 4 hours of runtime or so. About 50 to 60 miles was pulling a trailer. And doing the math on rough average RPM, it's about 432,000 revolutions is what that pump would have gone through, with the metal to metal just grinding itself to pieces. And those CP4s are designed that they actually have two pumping pulses per revolution. So double that, you're over 800,000, pushing 1 million revolutions is what this thing, or pumping pulses that this thing would have gone through with it intentionally damaged. So I'm sure it's going to be pretty ugly inside when we actually get it apart. But the plan is we're going to tear into it, assess the damage. We're going to show metering unit coming out, show it's clean, to prove that it does what it's supposed to, the kit does what it's supposed to. We're going to pull an injector, test it. If in a normal situation, if you didn't have the kit installed, the injectors would be absolutely wrecked with the amount of metal that's in the system. So we're going to pull an injector, test it versus what a new one would be. We'll be looking at return flow, which is actually going back to the tank. That's an indicator of leakage and damage in the injector. We'll also pull a factory filter to show whether there's metal or not in the first stage of factory filter coming back from the tank. That'll be clean, where normally it wouldn't be if you didn't have this installed. And we might even test the pump, depending on how much time we've got. So just to show how low of output it is. But either way, we're going to get tore into it. We're going to get the pump out, show what kind of carnage and debris there is, and then show that the rest of the system has been protected from that. So we'll go ahead and tear into it. I'm actually going to try to start it. I haven't started it since yesterday when we got it back. It has a hard time starting because the pump's so wounded, and at low RPM, cranking RPM, it can't produce enough flow. But we'll try to start it and see if it'll actually start before we tear into it. All right, we got the truck tore down to the point of at the CP4 now down in the valley. The next step is go ahead and pull the FCA, or the metering unit, there on top of the pump. What we should see is fairly uneventful, which would be no metal packed up under the side of the FCA screen, and no metal or signs of that contaminating the high pressure side. So we'll go ahead and get into it and see how it looks. I'm going to try to pull just the FCA out of the top and leave the bypass block down in it. For starters, here's the moment of truth. There we go. All right, so that's what we were expecting to see, which is a basically new looking FCA and screen. So this just shows that the bypass block and design of the kit did as intended and blocked all that debris that was trying to get to this point, which then translates into the rest of the system and lots of downtime and lots of expensive parts. So this is not what you'd expect to see if you had a stock truck with no no S&S bypass kit on it because it would be just packed full of metal right here. That's the telltale sign. You see lots of pictures of that on the internet. You see lots of customers that if they suspect a pump failure, what you do, you go and check the FCA. If it's got a bunch of metal on it, you know your pump failed. In this case, actually it's a really, really good thing. You suspect the pump fails, you pull this, it's gonna be clean regardless. If you suspect a pump fails with our kit on it, you cut the return filter apart because all that metal is gonna be captured in the return filter instead of captured here. So that's the key. So we'll set this right here for now. And I'll go ahead and pull the bypass block. What we would actually also expect to see is for it to be clean under here because it blocks that deadheads where the metal's trying to come from. So I'll move that out of the way so you can get a view down into the pump itself. As you can see down in the bore of where that FCA sits, it's also nice and clean. And that is what actually goes, the bottom of that bore feeds the top end of the plungers and the rails and injectors. So that's nice and clean as intended. So the reason that is because the passage from the bottom of the pump that is trying to feed the top of the pump with this design is deadheading right here into the side and captured between these two seals. It doesn't allow any flow there. So that's why you don't see any metal there. It retains it in the bottom of the pump. There's still lubrication and cooling flow going through the bottom of the pump back to the return, but all that metal that normally would have been on the metering unit or on the FCA is going back to the return, which then we capture right here in this return filter assembly. So the next step is we'll go ahead and pull the CB4 pump out. We'll tear it down, let you see what the inside looks like. I'm expecting that's going to be extremely damaged and failed from the abuse of us intentionally damaging it and grinding the rollers and installing it incorrectly on purpose, and the 180 miles or so that we put on it and about 4 hours of drive time since it was failing. But all of the debris that would have been in the rest of the system, I expect to find in this filter. We cut one of those filters apart already at UCC to show the effectiveness of that side of it. There's about another couple hours of drive time on this thing since this one has been installed. So all the metal that you would have normally found on the FCA without this kit, I expect to find it here. So next step, we'll get this stuff apart and we'll show you the next part of it. All right, to extra validate the effectiveness of the disaster kit, we're actually gonna go ahead and pull an injector, test the injector, make sure that basically test it versus new spec and see where it lands. If it ate metal, it would be exceptionally high on return leakage and would fail testing miserably. Because of there being no metal on the screen on the FCA, that's an indicator, basically proves already that no metal made it into the rails of the high pressure system. Just to go the extra step yet, we're gonna go ahead and pull an injector, show that it truly does save the injectors, and then put it back in. We've got it down to the point where we're ready to do that. The pump's pretty well loose too, so we're gonna go ahead and pull the pump as well. That way we can tear it down and you see the last bit of what's left of it. We'll spare you from all the shenanigans and in pain of getting to the point where you can actually get the stupid injector broke loose. We cheated a little bit and put a high pressure line that probably used to be for a race car, but for now we're using it as a way to get the injector out. So she's pretty well loose now, luckily, but all right. So there she is. You can get a shot of the serial number, date code there. These are original. This is a 2016, about 90,000 miles on it. It'll go to the ultrasonic cleaner and then go to get tested. We'll show you the results of that later. The pump's pretty well ready to come out now at this point too. So there's this poor soul that really took one for the team. This pump is also original. It's had a bypass kit, disaster prevention kit on it for most of its life, one variant or another, as this truck's been used for testing and validation work. But this will go to the bench and we'll go ahead and get it tore down and show you guys the results. All right, so we got the injector pulled out of the truck earlier, and now we're gonna put it on the test bench to assess its health. We expect, because of the disaster prevention kit being installed, it's gonna be essentially like a new injector. It's got 90,000 miles on it or so, but those piezo injectors last a long time and don't really wear much. So we're gonna run it on our test bench here. Clayton's gonna fire it up and we'll run it. We've got basically what a new injector tests like of this generation, so we're gonna compare it to that. So we test them at a variety of pressures and energizing times. For these piezos, we're going to run them at 200 MPa or 2000 bar, 1000 microseconds and 790 microseconds. We'll also run them at a couple lower pressure points, 120 MPa and 30 MPa. But the key to kind of judge the overall health of an injector, and if it's been damaged from CP4 failure, it's because it has a lot of metal debris in it, and that metal debris beats up the valves and seats inside of the injector and makes it really high on leakage. So that means it'll be high on return flow. So we're measuring return flow as well. And the key checkpoint for that is the 200 MPa 790 microsecond point. So that's the one we'll be checking return flow. So we're watching injection rate shape over here. You can see the blue curve is basically the profile of the injection event. So he's working it up in pressure right now. It's 1000 microseconds. There's 200 MPa, so that's kind of the full load point. So now we go down to a lower rail pressure point. The injector baseline that we pulled up was just a fairly recent new injector that we had. So not any in particular cherry picked, it was just a new one, but generally these are really consistent and pretty tight spread. But we're within, between an actual brand new one and this one straight out of the truck that had that carnage, or less than 1% variance between the two. So this final point is closer to an idle type condition, kind of between an idle and a pilot injection. It's in the 4 cube range. And it's dead nuts right there too. So here is the comparison results here. You can see they're pretty much indistinguishable, is what we just found. A new one and the 90,000 mile takeout, which had a absolutely destroyed injection pump that should have been trying to heavily damage the injectors. But it's looks like a new one, so the proof's in the pudding. So we got all the parts off the truck, and we're going to tear down the pump to see how it looks inside. This is the filter that was on the truck. This filter was on it initially through part of its really painful journey, and we cut it apart at the UCC show to see what was inside of it and show customers who were interested how much metal was in it as it was catching it. So this is the second one. This filter's got about 80 or 100 miles on it probably. Fairly slow miles, trying to limp the truck home in because the pump was low on output, which I think is what we're going to find in here is the cam is wore down significantly, which makes it low lift and low output. That's why it didn't have much power. We got the gear here as well, so we'll kind of see what we're working with. One thing we did find when it came apart, which is fairly interesting but not that surprising, is it actually sheared the roll pin off of the shaft. So the CP4s are timed, so there's actually a roll pin and a keyway in the gear. And what we found is as the pump was failing, it increases the drive torque in the on the gear and on the shaft because it's failing inside, so it's dragging very hard. That's where like some increased temperature, it's a lot of where the metal wear comes from. We've seen this on the test bench when we failed these doing the same test as well, to the point where it actually kicked out on the test bench because the electrical drive for the motor was too high and was overheating. So it's interesting. It didn't really damage the gear much, but there's a little bit of sign of, it looks like basically the load increased enough that it sheared the pin and slipped and then kind of locked and stayed put. So but there's definitely some witness marks on the taper where you can see that there was some slippage on the pump as it sheared that off. So that's basically a sign of there was lots of bad things happening inside. So this is the metering unit that came off of it. Normal form, this would be absolutely packed full of metal. We'll show a couple of pictures of what they generally look like when a pump like this fails, but because the kit was installed and this was inside of here, blocking the flow from the bottom end, everything was protected. So I'll go ahead and pull one of the heads off of this, assuming it'll come apart. This was the one that I took off in the truck and then ran it on the grinder, turned it 90 degrees, intentionally damaged. So we will see what she looks like. There's a lot of spring force. Probably not nearly as much as there normally is because the cam's so ground down. Yep, that didn't feel like normal, but it's kind of what I expect. Okay, so this is basically the pump is split into two sections essentially. As far as this failure mode and this product is considered, there's the lower half and the upper half. You can see this is the upper half. So this is the inlet and outlet valves are in here. This is the section that we're protecting with this product. So the lower section is where all the carnage comes from and is what we're blocking the flow from to keep it keep the contamination down there. So this is the high pressure side. This is actually the plunger, the pumping element. This looks like new, which is what we would expect. Good actual pumping action there. So the DLC is perfect. That just shows that the high pressure side is still good. Ooh, this bucket is going to be hard to get out though. If it will come out. We might have to push it out from the bottom. Let me try the other head and we'll see what kind of luck we've got there. So normally there's even more spring force trying to push these things up, but like I say, I think the cam is going to be wore down so far that there's not much pushing out anymore. This one as well, basically like new. So this part of the pump is completely protected by the S&S disaster prevention kit. That's why these still look good and still function basically. So you can see this one also. The plunger, the coating, the DLC, basically like new. Still good. All right. So under here is the bucket and the roller. And those, as expected, are pretty screwed up. So what we'll do, we got to put this in a puller, pull this off, then we can see the insides. We'll do that here in a minute and come back. For now, we'll also show what this thing looks like. We got it broke loose, but I haven't looked in here yet. I have to grab a rag. I thought I had it broke loose. Okay, just had to put my purse down. Feels pretty gritty. So this side's protected, but there's a lot of flow trying to go back to the tank out of the return. And that's where this comes in. This catches all that. Okay. So there's a little bit of debris sitting up here. There's probably not gonna be as much in this filter as there was in the original filter. That one was from when it was actually towing. The truck was pulling our show trailer, was under heavier load, working harder, and had just been severely damaged. So you can see from this guy, there's a lot of metal up on top. There's a lot of metal down in the filter, but the insides of the filter in here where it matters is nice and clean. And this is disgusting in here, but basically there's just sludge, which is everything that that was trying to normally go into your injectors and into the rest of the system is what is this just absolute gnarly metal shrapnel. So the key is you want it in here, not in here, not on here, and not in the rest of your system. So let me cut this filter apart. We'll see how it looks. And it won't be pretty, I'm sure, but it probably won't be quite as bad as the original filter, if I had to guess. So with the Gen 2.1, we went to a metal spin-on filter so that it's higher temperature capable as well as more available. So we don't have a clear bowl in it anymore like the Gen 2s had. So if you suspect a failure, you can't just kind of look in the bowl. But what you can do, normally if you suspect a failure, most people go to troubleshoot, they go to pull this off the pump. To get to that, you got to pull the intakes. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Also, with a disaster kit installed, it can be misleading because, as we just showed, the pump can be failed terribly, and this is still going to be clean, which is the whole point. But if you're not thinking about that and you see this is clean, you might mislead yourself and think the pump's okay. That doesn't mean it is. So what you can do is spin this filter off the filter head easy, cut it apart, and look for material there. So that's going to be your best way to troubleshoot quickly. That's another benefit. You don't have to take the intake, upper and lower intakes apart. You don't have to get down to the pump to try to see if the pump's failed. Just take the filter off. It's easy to get to, and cut it apart. Filter cutters are pretty handy for whether it's fuel system, oil system, whatever else. They can be a good tool to have. Or you just use a cut-off wheel if you really want to get aggressive. Come on, there we go. Okay. So you can see here, so here's the seal that keeps clean from dirty. You can see some metal right up here on top. The outside is the dirty side, the inside's the clean side. So that seal basically is the differentiator. You'll see metal up here. We'll see what she looks like inside. You can't see it very good in the video, but we'll go ahead and pull her up. You can see it's good and dirty. There's a lot of material right down here. So lots of metal confirmed again. We'll pour this out in some clear stuff and put some shots in there to show, but you can see there's lots of metal debris. So all of this, without this kit, all of this would have been in your fuel tank, would have been in your fuel cooler, would have been in your supply pump, and all the other places you don't want it to be. So this so far is good to go. Everything is as expected, but completely successful test. We'll get this pump the rest of the way apart and come right back and show you the rest. So we got the pump apart. It came apart hard as expected. There was a lot of heat, a lot of damage, a lot of carnage in the bottom end of this pump. As I showed earlier, the top end is protected and is good, but the bottom end really, really saw some damage. So we'll go ahead and pull it the rest of the way apart. So this cam, as we were expecting to see, is in really, really rough shape. The reason that the truck starts to have trouble on the road building pressure is because essentially it grinds it down to where there's not much lift anymore. So the plungers are barely moving anymore. That's why it goes low output. But with our kit installed, you can actually limp it along for a significant period of time, as we showed. So if you didn't have this, all this metal would end up in your injectors and damaging your pump. The truck's going to go down without warning and much more quickly. So in this case, it's really a benefit that you can have almost an early indicator potentially, and definitely drive it a lot further, get it to where you need to go before it's going to leave you stranded because it didn't also wipe out your injectors and the valves in the pump. This is what the cam's supposed to look like. Here's what the cam actually looks like. So cams will often look like that or similar to that when pumps fail, even if they're obviously not done intentionally. This is one a little bit unique. You can see this roller was turned at 90 degrees while it was driving for the almost 1 million revolutions or strokes that this thing went through while it was damaged. Basically made a banana out of that roller and actually started cutting into the bucket. This is probably some of that squalling and absolute horrendous noises that we were hearing while we were driving it. This again, if they turn 90 degrees like this, there's nothing that's going to save it at that point. It's going to grind until it goes catastrophic, or it rubs the lobes off where you got no more lift. Doesn't care what the lubricity of the fuel is, anything else, it's not coming out of it. What's kind of interesting is this roller was turned 90. This roller was normal, and it actually, this roller's loose. Basically, what's left of this one basically just cut, the cam ate it away until it just fit to match the little cam right there. So this went for a long time, lots of damage, lots of carnage. It's definitely wounded. This is what the bucket should look like and the roller. A nice, very good surface finish roller, and be in good condition, obviously. So there's a lot of heat that was generated by this, and it's about what we expected to see, but the good news is none of it exited the bottom end to the filter. So every bit of the metal that's missing from here normally would have been in your injectors, in your tank, in your fuel cooler, everywhere you don't want it to be. That's the whole purpose of this, is it contains all that. You can see the huge amounts of this metal that comes out of here. This is why when you have a pump failure, the standard protocol is everything gets replaced. If you don't have this kit on it, that's why this is the perfect example. You have 10 times more than that, is actually more than that. There's probably 100 times more than that right there. It was captured in this filter media and is in here. And that's why most shops, if a pump fails and you don't have one of these kits on, they don't even try to clean anything. You get new rails, new lines, new everything, because it's not hardly even worth trying to get this really, really fine media out of here. So that metal is not flakes, if you notice. It's really fine debris. So it's small micron type stuff. So it'll still get through screens. That's why even like with the screen that's on the metering unit here, seems like that should be a pretty decent filter. But with as small as that stuff is, it still gets right through there and can damage other parts. Also, this is a really good example and good test for how much material is produced. This is the filter. We cut one of them apart. So what this is here is the same as this. This is why we selected a proper spin-on filter with a lot of surface area. So you can see how much actual surface area we're working with here. This is needed to capture all that material. If you have a really, really fine filter or small filter or not much surface area, it's going to plug that thing up and you're going to have trouble. But fortunately with this, we've got lots. There's 136 square inches, I think, of filter material here, which is going to capture all that small debris until you can get it to get repaired. So the study went great. I mean, we put our own truck on the line, had confidence in it, but there's always a little bit of risk there and a little bit of nervousness, but everything went as we expected. Pump failed drastically, caught all the material, and was able to drive the truck for extended period of time to get it where we needed to go before we had to tear it down. So hopefully this helps to explain how the kit works, to squash any skeptics, and also to really just help explain why we developed this product and why any 6.7 Ford owner should want it. Protects the return side, protects the high pressure side, and helps you to be able to drive the truck much further than you normally would have while it's failing. So you can check out our website for more information for in-vehicle schematics as to how it works and a little more, and also go to the dealer locator and find out where to get them. Thanks.